Hello, everyone. Welcome to a unique YouTube video. This is not and was not streamed at any point. Um, there's been a lot of activity recently on the channel for Rome Total War, and there's been a couple of questions on the streams as to which factions you should play. We have done total game victories on several of these factions. But most importantly, I want to be able to give you guys an understanding of why some factions are very difficult to play and how to avoid any massive failures, calamities, or dejections when you pick your faction. So, we have three categories here, or sorry, we have 7 categories here. You can't lose. Basically, when you pick that faction, you physically can't lose, either because the game directs you in a certain way, or your units are so overpowered in the region that you're in that you can just bulldoze your way to victory. You know how Rome Total War works. This is you're familiar with the game enough, and you're looking to dabble in some other regions, factions, etc. This is for a serious game. Now that you know the basics and the mechanics of Rome Total War, you're ready to get into a full-blown game, not just a short campaign, maybe a 50 province victory, or even going for 30. Up for a challenge means, hey, these factions are going to be a little bit harder to play, but you can win with them. They're not impossible, and they are super fun. We have the experienced players only section. This is only going to be for the players that have at least about 200, 250 hours. They know the different units, the different styles of combat, and they are familiar with where they should move their armies around the map. Fully uses unit abilities. If you understand how to use horse archers appropriately, if you understand how to use testudos, phalanxes, flaming arrows when necessary, these are going to be the very tough factions for you, but you're still going to have a blast with them. And then Death Wish. Death Wish is, hey, there's going to be a loss or two. The chances of you winning as this faction are very low, but if you have maybe 1,000, 1,200 hours in Rome Total War, those should be a very fun game for you. So starting off with number 1, we have Armenia. Armenia utilizes cataphracts along with horse archers, very similar to Parthia. However, because they're kind of sandwiched between Pontis and Parthia, it makes them a very easy target to be removed at the beginning of the game. The best way to play Armenia is to attack Parthia first, eliminate their southern provinces, stabilize your economy, and then start going after Pontus. Armenia is not necessarily a death wish faction, but there are going to be considerable challenges to it. So you have to be able to know how to use all of the abilities to the best of your ability. Britannia is a very easy faction. You're off in the corner of the map, and the only people that you have to go against are Gaul and Germania at the beginning, followed by the Julii towards mid to late game, and then boom, you're right there at Rome. Because you have chariots as well as head hurdlers, this is actually a pretty easy faction to play as. Not only have I done a full 50 conquest, I have done full world conquests with Britannia before. The Roman houses we're going to come to later, just because we have SPQR in the list, and you can play as SPQR. You can play as all of these factions, in fact, including the rebels. However, there is going to be some nuances there, so we'll get to that in a second. Carthage is going to be for experienced players or up for a challenge. Just for the benefit of the people out there, I'm going to say it's for experienced players. Having to deal with the Scipii right off the bat, which is the Roman blue faction, is going to be a nightmare challenge for you guys. However, there are some benefits and some opportunities that you can take. You can move south and conquer Numidia, or you can use your one province in Spain and attack Spain. So while chances are you will lose some provinces off the bat, you can kind of reconsolidate either in southern Africa or in Spain. Dacia is also going to be for experienced players. Dacia has a bunch of rebel factions. I say rebel factions, rebel provinces around it, so it can expand very quickly. The problem is because the Dacian provinces are so large, you will have a very difficult time monitoring your armies and being able to come to a city's defense if need be. Egypt, you can't lose. When you're playing as Egypt, you have access to some of the best chariots in the game. You have access to the best pikemen in the game. The Pharaoh's spearmen, which can phalanx. You have access to some of the best archers, and your generals aren't range only. You have access to both range generals in the beginning of the game and then melee generals towards the middle of the game. Playing as Egypt, all you have to do is go after the Numidian province to your west, and then fight the solicits to your north, conquer Parthia, Pontis, etc. And then at that point, your economy should already be booming because of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, that you can really just steamroll the House of Brutii. Gaul is if you're up for a challenge. Even though Gaul is the neighboring province to the House of Julii, which is the Red Roman faction, it's actually not as difficult a game as you'd think. The biggest thing is if you know how to play Roman Total War, you're familiar with the mechanics, the easiest thing for you to do when playing as Gaul is to hit the Julii right off the bat. The Brutii and Scipii are going to be doing their own things and won't be able to come to the aid of the Julii. Using your warband tactics, you should be able to just overwhelm the Julii and their few provinces. Germania is if you're looking for a serious game. Germania can expand very quickly because of the rebel provinces that also border Dacia. However, Germania has access to some of the better archers in the game, as well as hounds, so you do have that going for you. Unfortunately, Germania is pretty weak on infantry. Not the absolute greatest to deal with in the early game. However, because you're dealing with a bunch of rando factions and rebels, they are usually one of the last factions to be alive towards the end of the game. The Greeks is also if you're looking for a serious game. The Greeks have to fight the Brutii pretty much right off the bat. However, fortunately for you, because all of the spearmen in Greece have access to the phalanx, it's very easy to defend a city against thousands of Romans with only 4 or 5 units. Any of the starter nations that get the phalanx have a huge advantage against the Romans. However, those groups are either further away from the Romans to give Rome time to build up, or have weak navies. In this instance, Greece does not have a good navy and does not have access to a lot of ports right off the bat. And so, in order to build up a sizable fleet, in order to protect yourself against the Romans, is nigh impossible. One of my favorite factions to play as, but for more experienced players, is Macedon. Macedon has the same units as Greece to an extent, more missile cavalry than Greece does, but Macedon have access to the levy pikemen. Pikemen with, instead of 160 men per unit, 240, which makes them having sheer manpower as their priority. They are not stronger units, but the fact that there's more of them really allows you to do well on defensive battles and really has to make you think on offensive battles. Numidia is a death wish. Chances are either Egypt is going to come in and absolutely tank you, or Carthage is going to move south and destroy you. If you're able to survive both against Carthage and against Egypt, you're still going to have to deal with the Romans. The only saving grace in these Numidian playthroughs is the fact that you get access to elephants very, very, very late, though. You can also recruit mercenary war elephants, but at that point, you know, mercenary war elephants cost about 4,000 denarii per unit. If you have 4,000 denarii playing as Numidia, you're doing something really, really right. Most of the time, Numidia ends up in bankruptcy, just trying to build up their cities. Parthia is another nation, very difficult to play as because it's so far out in the boonies, but you do have access to cataphracts. You do have access to some of the best horse archers in the game. The only thing is they have no, and I mean absolutely zero, good infantry units. The Eastern Spearmen are essentially cannon fodder. They are basically peasants just in robes. The only good thing is they have a hidden buff against chariots. So, if you know when to use your horse archers, you know when to push your Eastern infantry, and you know how to use your cataphracts in a flanking formation, Parthia can be a very fun game. However, if you are just starting to try and play Rome Total War, it is not ever a good option. In our current playthrough of Rome Total War, we are playing as Parthia. We had to fight the Solicits, Egypt, Pontis, and now the Romans all at once. It's an absolute nightmare. But speaking of Pontis, relatively easy game. And it's relatively easy because as long as you can kick the Greeks out of Pergamum, you can pretty much take over all of modern day Turkey. And at that point, you're clear sailing. The scythed chariots that Pontus has and controls are some of the most formidable chariots in the game. If you have just units of chariots and you auto-resolve against the Romans, 9 out of 10 times, it'll be an absolutely crushing victory. You'll lose maybe 100, 150 chariots, but the Romans will lose 2,000 plus men. The Rebels is also a Death Wish faction. You definitely don't want to play the Rebels unless you absolutely know everything there is to know about the game. There are some saving graces. Whenever a faction is destroyed, any generals and those armies outside of those faction walls become yours. And so you do get access to some high tiered units later in the game. But because there is no actual victory condition for the rebels, and there is no way for you to actually have an economy, you have to 100% rely on your ability to gauge your productivity and understand whether or not you need to go in for a fight. Scythia is if you're up for a challenge. Scythia has chariots, they have horse archers, really crappy infantry, but because they're out in the open, you have access to a lot of different avenues you can take. You can take the northern Parthian province to start, and then either move south to fight Armenia and Parthia, or you can go west to fight Thrace, Macedon, and Dacia. As soon as you hit the Romans, though, things are going to be a problem just because of the way that time progresses in the game. So you're going to have to make sure that you have a sizable army in order to even attempt to move into the Italian peninsula. The solicits are a serious game, pretty fun to play as. They don't get access to some of the crazier things that like Egypt gets, but because of the elephants that are presented to them, the solicits, so long as Egypt doesn't wipe them from the face of the earth, can easily take on Pontis with the help of the Egyptian economy, and then taking out Parthia and Armenia are pretty set in stone. The solicits also have access to the phalanx, which really gives them a nice little buff in those defensive positions. Spain is if you're up for a challenge. Spain, it's very easy to control and solidify your position. There's only one Gaul province in Spain, and there's only one Carthage province, Corduba. If you're able to take out both of those provinces and secure your northern border, Spain can become a huge economic powerhouse. And using the Iberian infantry and the silver shields, you are able to dominate the Romans. We did a full playthrough as Spain, and I think before the year 200, we fully conquered all Roman factions and up to like 65 provinces. It was an incredible game. Thrace. Oh boy. I love playing as Thrace. It is a very fun, challenging game because they are so weak right at the start. But you have to know how to use Thrace's abilities. You have to know how to use your cavalry. You have to know how to use the falxmen. If you don't, Thrace is just another goober faction, and they will get stomped over and over and over again. In your playthroughs, when you're playing as Rome, you might find that Thrace is one of the first factions to be eliminated, and that's for good reason. However, if you're in the driver's seat playing as Thrace, you have a high probability of actually kicking some ass, as long as you understand what everything means and does. So now we're going to move on to the Roman factions, and this is where, some of the more hardcore players in the community are going to take issue. I am only doing this for players who are just trying to come into Rome Total War. They're not 100% sure what they're doing, or they have just a grasp of the game a little bit, and we're going to go from there. SPQR, you start off with a single city. So there's going to be a unique play style to SPQR. So unless you know exactly what you're doing, exactly where you need to go, and how to keep the other three Roman factions intact, you're going to have a fun SPQR game. Otherwise, if you don't know what you're doing, it could easily be a Death Wish game. Um, I'm going to put it into you need to understand how to fully use all of the abilities and understand the map mechanics. A great way is to look at a map of the Rome Total War field before starting, because SPQR is absolutely useless until you pick up a second city. Once you pick up a second city, SPQR can pop off. Until then, though, you are trapped, and it is a very challenging game. The House of Brutii, though, is probably up for a challenge. The reason for that is you have to fight against the Greeks, which are very, very strong and also have the phalanx open to them. You will have to fight against Macedon, also have the phalanx available to them and have strong cities. If you're able to both eliminate the Greeks and the Macedonians, the entire east of the game is open to you until you hit Egypt. Once you hit Egypt, things go south for you very, very quickly, but you're able to stabilize after a battle or two and crush them. Um, Generally speaking, though, all of these Roman factions can really go into you can't lose as them, except SPQR. However, looking at each of the Roman factions as the Roman faction themselves instead of just against the rest of the game, the Brutii is really up for a challenge. The Julii, however, is if you know how Rome Total War works. The Julii only have one target throughout the entire game, and that's really Gaul and the northern tribes. Gaul and the northern tribes are a piece of cake playing as the Romans. As long as you don't go heavy on the town watch, you pick up some Hastati, some Equites, and you will be fine. The biggest issue is the Brutii, actually. If the Brutii go into the Greek peninsula and then move north, capturing parts of Dacia, the Julii can't expand anymore. The Julii can go over towards um, Spain, France, and Britain, but realistically, once that happens, you're pretty much boxed in. If you're going for a full conquer, taking the Julii and hitting Greece with the Brutii is actually probably going to be your best option to getting the full 50 provinces. Otherwise, it's going to get to the point where you're going to have to start taking provinces from your Roman brothers before you can take SPQR and win the game. And finally, we have the Scipii. The Scipii is for experienced players. You're going to have to go against Carthage, which is a very difficult nation. They have a very strong army. Their cities are very well fortified. After that, though, you can't expand anywhere. The only place for you to go is Egypt. Um, the Julii have probably conquered most of Europe at that point, probably have gotten into Spain, and the Brutii have taken Greece and Crete. So the only way for the Scipii to actually grow is through Africa. So for the Scipii, it's literally fight Carthage, take over a little bit of Numidia, but then immediately go for Egypt. And that's where Scipii games fall apart. The best way to win as Scipii is once you start doing your Egyptian invasions, have a ton of manpower available for you in order to push in as much as you can. Reinforcements are going to be very limited as you move across North Africa. And so the only way that you're able to retrain your armies is when you actually start taking some of the Egyptian stronghold cities like Alexandria or Memphis. So this is the list, ladies and gentlemen. I would appreciate everyone that watched. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. We will be continuing to put up more Rome Total War videos for you guys on the channel. And if you want to make your own list and send it to me, I will have the link for this in the description. Please make sure you join our Discord so that we can talk about stuff like this. But otherwise, I hope you all have an incredible rest of your day, and we will see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.